Hello and welcome to our next Green and Blue TV clip. This month and in February we are doing a promotion which is all about learning, because that's a very good way to brighten up to quite dull months. We've put together a case of wine featuring 6 wines and 3 different grape varieties. The idea being that you'll watch this clip and be very inspired and then buy the case and find out an awful lot about Chenin Blanc, Grenache and Sangiovese. So let's talk about Chenin Blanc first. This is a relatively old French variety. We can trace it back to about the 9th century, which is of course based in the Loire Valley in France, one of our all-time favorite wine regions in the world. It's now actually more widely grown in South Africa, although they didn't realize that it was Chenin Blanc till about 1965. And it's only very recently in South Africa that they've actually started to take it more seriously, which is a good thing because they're starting to make some delicious examples. However, both the examples that we're tasting today are from France and are from the Loire. The examples we've chosen are really to demonstrate the incredible versatility of Chenin Blanc. It's one of the only white grape varieties that is really good at making dry wine, semi-sweet white wine, sweet wine, extremely sweet white wine, and sparkling wine, and that really is very unusual. Partly it gets this right because it is a grape variety that is very high in acidity, so it makes very crisp white wine, and that's one of the reasons why it does so well in places like South Africa, very hot places, because even though it's very hot, the grape manages to retain some of its freshness. In the Loire Valley, until really quite recently, there were an awful lot of examples that were overly crisp, really. They kind of brought tears to your eyes, and even though they aged brilliantly in their youth, they were sometimes quite hard work. However, increasingly in the last 10 years, with better understanding of grape growing techniques and of course many more natural winemakers growing organically, etc., the fruit now is, in the best examples, in such incredibly good condition and so intrinsically balanced that you just get delicious wine that doesn't have any of the problems of meanness which some of the older examples had. What you have in your case is a bottle of sparkling wine. Chenin Blanc is often used to make sparkling in France and in South Africa actually, and it does the job beautifully because of the crisp acidity, but also because even in the sparkling examples you do get a hint of the honeyed aromatic fruit which is so characteristic of this variety. So you have a totally delicious sparkling Vouvray from one of our favorite producers, Champelou, based in Vouvray. And then you have a completely still Chenin, which comes from the Anjou region of the Loire. Now, this is unimpeded Chenin at its finest. It's made by a winemaker called Richard Leroy, who is a great purist. He's actually a great fan of Riesling, and you can kind of see that when you taste his Chenin, because he's really going for very crystal mineral purity. He doesn't oak, and he doesn't pick too late. He doesn't look for any botrytis on the fruit, which is the rot that afflicts Chenin quite easily, and which increasingly people who are making dry Chenin are looking for, just to give a bit of extra richness and complexity. Richard Leroy doesn't want that. He wants pure, clean, healthy fruit, and the results he gets from his very interesting vineyards, a lot of schist and clay in his vineyards, are very pure and very mineral and very delicious. So you can contrast a sparkling Chenin, which works beautifully, against a really fine still Chenin, which we would urge you to decant and not to drink too cold if you possibly can. The next grape variety you're going to look at is Grenache, which is, in my opinion, a vastly underrated grape variety. It's very widely planted. It used to be the second most planted grape variety in the world, but it's since been overtaken by Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. It's a grape variety that can be quite schizophrenic, really, because it can make some very wishy-washy, dilute red wine if you don't grow it carefully. But then if you are growing it carefully, particularly if you're lucky enough to have a vineyard that's full of old vines and you're in a very hot, dry place, you get some of the most fantastically concentrated wines in the world. However, the general thinking on Grenache is that it's a grape variety that must be blended. It doesn't have enough of its own stuffing to make a wine by itself. That's not actually true, but the two examples that are in the case are both blended. It's a variety that doesn't have a lot of structure, so not very high acidity, not very high tannins. In the more concentrated examples, both of those are there, but never to an astonishing degree. What it is high in is sugar. And because it's a grape variety that takes a long time to ripen, those levels often get extremely high. So you do get wines with alcohol with Grenache. They're very weighty in the mouth, but they're not particularly grippy on the tongue or particularly crisp. The first example in your case is a Rioja from one of our favorite producers, namely Alvaro Palacios, and it's his baby Rioja, which has hardly any wood at all. So the 50% Grenache in this, it is blended with 50% Tempranillo, comes through really clearly. It is a Spanish grape variety, so as far as we can tell, the Sardinians sometimes claim that it was in Sardinia first and then it got taken to Spain from there, but that does seem quite unlikely. So it's quite appropriate that we have a Spanish version in the case. This is a really good example of a very pure fruit Grenache. Lots of kind of orange peel and clove flavors, which are very typical. It's a very spicy grape variety, but in a lovely, juicy, easy to drink body. You can try that against a wine from one of our favorite natural wine producers, namely Monsieur Jean-François Nic, who makes wine in the Roussillon area of France. Now, Roussillon obviously is another very hot and dry place, so that suits Grenache down to the ground. And in the case of this lovely wine, the yields are extremely low. So that means that each vine that grows as fruit doesn't grow very much fruit. So there's lots and lots of concentration going into the grape. He's also someone who doesn't intervene at all in the winery. He tends to ferment at a low temperature in order to hold on to really fresh fruit flavors, but he doesn't use any wood, and he doesn't use any sulfur, and he doesn't fine, and he doesn't filter. So what you have in this version is a much kind of more raw, earthy and animal version of Grenache, blended with 30% Syrah. It's a lot more rustic than the Rioja, but that same perfume comes through, and we actually like to have this with orange and geranium chocolate, which is a very, very good match.